All right, my BIBLEin365 brothers and sisters, we are at the amazing book of Ezra. Now, if you have not read this book, I can tell you this right now, you are in for quite a treat. Ezra is, of course, considered to be a post-exilic book. And keep this in mind, although Ezra is regarded by many as a prophet and, of course, a scribe, he is undoubtedly a priest. As a matter of fact, his great-grandfather was Hilkiah, who was the priest that actually led Josiah closer to the Lord and continued to do this amazing work of reformation during the time of such a notable king. Now, I want to say this because I think it's very, very important. What Ezra does is remarkable. Ezra leads a group of people into Jerusalem to rebuild the temple, and that was quite a task. Now, I think that it is important to note that as Ezra does this work, one of the things that is really, really important is it centers around a focal point that a lot of people oftentimes don't necessarily discuss or really reflect upon, and that is the proclamation of King Cyrus to actually move forward and do this. Now, this has prophetic relevance, okay, and I think that that's important to note. Daniel sheds light on this for us, and as well, I think it's also important to note that when you look at this picture from afar off, you kind of look at the bird's eye view, you'll understand just how remarkably sovereign God actually is, especially in using pagan kings to do his very, very godly work. I think it's also important to note that when we look at who actually returned to build the temple, that was a significant detail to God, significant enough that we actually have record of it in Ezra chapter 2, and it kind of gives us an understanding. And then, of course, we get into the fact where the foundation of the temple starts to be laid, and almost immediately we see the work of that temple being stopped and what ends up happening. And in essence, it's a very good lesson to us as into how we should act when we begin to see opposition in doing the work that God has actually called us to do. Now, I think it's important to note this because when we get near the end of Ezra, there is a massive conversation about what happens when you are a godly person and you allow yourself to enter into a relationship with ungodly people. And we're talking about marriage relationships here and how it actually affects the history of the nation, how it would affect the future of the nation, and of course, how it affects you personally as a believer. It should be noted, and I think it's something that's worth reminding us over when we read Ezra, is the whole reason why Israel got in this mess in the first place was because of the type of compromising that the people were doing and entering into these relationships that took their focus away from God and literally caused them to turn their hearts from the true and living God. I also think that we should focus for just a minute on the multiple returns that end up taking place here, because it can be confusing when you look at who returned where and at what time. The first of the returns is the one that was under the leadership of Zerubbabel, okay? And I think we should note that that is somewhere around 530 BC. Then the next noted move would have been Ezra's moving, and that would have been in 458 BC. And then Nehemiah comes roughly about 10 to 12 years later, which would have been in 444 BC. And when we go through our review of Nehemiah, we'll talk about why Nehemiah's move was so important and why it was so critical. And we'll talk about why that actually started this massive precedent for the fulfillment of even more Bible prophecy. Either way, one of the things that we have to understand, and this is the lesson that we learned from the book of Ezra, is how critical it is to keep our eyes on the Lord. That when we take our eyes off the Lord, we bring ourselves into a place of bondage and destruction, and it never ends well. So as you're going through the book of Ezra, let that be the primary reminder to you that when you stay close to God, you find yourself in the midst of his protection. When you run from him, then in essence, you also remove yourself from all the wonderful things that God has for you. And it's really, really important that we not lose sight of that. So this is going to be a good one. You're going to love it. Ezra is an awesome, awesome book. And I can tell you this right now, you will see a person who lived up to an amazing call that God had placed upon their life and did the work that God called them to do well. It's a great book. It should encourage you and it should motivate you to live righteously, understanding the fact that we're running out of time and our days are numbered. All right? Love you guys. God bless you.